Welcome, fellow explorers of the ancient world, to the Story of Us by Skoob, to another captivating journey through time. I'm your host, Madison Reed, and today we're unwrapping one of history's most fascinating and enduring practices, the art of mummification. From the sacred sands of Egypt to the mysterious highlands of Peru, from royal burial chambers to European apothecaries, we'll discover how the preservation of the dead became one of humanity's most extraordinary obsessions. Picture this. You're standing in the scorching Egyptian desert, watching as skilled embalmers carefully prepare a pharaoh for his eternal journey. The air is thick with incense, natron salt, and the weight of 4,000 years of tradition. This isn't just about preserving flesh and bone. This is about conquering death itself. So settle in, close your eyes, and let me transport you to a world where death was merely the beginning of an incredible adventure. Let's begin our story in ancient Egypt, around 4000 BCE, when human civilization was still finding its footing. The Egyptians had developed something truly remarkable, a profound, unshakable belief that death wasn't the end, but rather a doorway to eternal happiness in a paradise called the Field of Reeds. Imagine the hope this gave them. While other civilizations viewed death as a terrifying unknown, the Egyptians saw it as graduation day, the moment when you'd finally reach the ultimate destination. But here's the catch. To ensure your soul's eternal afterlife, your physical body needed to be preserved here on Earth. No body, no eternal paradise. This belief wasn't just wishful thinking. It was the driving force behind one of history's most elaborate and theatrical death rituals. The ancient Greek historian Herodotus gives us a vivid window into these ceremonies, describing scenes that would make even the most dramatic modern funeral seem understated. Picture this heartbreaking scene. When a prominent person died, the women of the family would coat their faces and heads with mud, a raw, visceral display of grief. They'd then walk through the entire town, their garments fastened with belts, striking their exposed chests in mourning while crying out in anguish. The men would join this procession, adopting the same dress and self-flagellation. Can you imagine the sound echoing through those ancient streets? The collective wailing, the rhythmic beating of chests, the shuffle of feet moving through dusty roads? This wasn't just grief. This was a community-wide acknowledgement that someone was about to embark on the most important journey of their existence. Only after this powerful ceremony would the body be taken for the sacred process of mummification. By the middle of the 3rd millennium BCE, mummification had become the cornerstone of Egyptian burial practices. But here's what's fascinating. Many scholars believe this practice actually emerged from a happy accident. Egypt's naturally dry sands had been preserving bodies for centuries, and observant Egyptians noticed that corpses buried in the desert often remained remarkably intact. They thought, if nature can do this by chance, imagine what we could accomplish with intention and skill. This observation sparked a revolution in how humanity approached death and preservation. Now, here's where our story takes an unexpectedly practical turn. You might think mummification was a sacred ritual performed by priests in solemn temples, but the reality was far more businesslike. This was ancient Egypt's most sophisticated service industry. When someone died, their family would take the body to professional embalmers. Think of them as the ultimate specialists in eternal preservation. According to Herodotus, these embalmers were shrewd business people. They'd present wooden models to grieving families, each depicting different levels of mummification services. It was like browsing a catalog, except instead of choosing between car models, you were selecting how elaborately your loved one would be prepared for eternity. The top-tier service was the Osiris package, named after the god of the afterlife himself. This was the Rolls-Royce of mummification, complete with every possible preservation technique and ritual. For families of more modest means, there were economical options that still provided the essential elements needed for the afterlife journey. The secret weapon in this entire process was natron, what Egyptologist Sally Ikram calls divine salt. This wasn't just any ordinary salt. It was a natural compound found abundantly in Egypt, particularly in the Wadi Natron region northwest of Cairo. This miraculous substance contained sodium bicarbonate, sodium carbonate, sodium sulfate, and sodium chloride, creating the perfect desiccating and degreasing cocktail. Let me walk you through the premium mummification process because it's absolutely fascinating in its precision and detail. First, the deceased's brain was carefully extracted through the nostrils using an iron hook, a delicate procedure that required incredible skill. Any remaining brain matter was washed out with specialized drugs. The Egyptians considered the brain relatively unimportant, viewing the heart as the true center of intelligence and emotion. Next came the abdominal work. Using a flint knife, embalmers would open the flanks to remove the contents of the abdomen. Every organ was meticulously cleansed and rinsed first with palm wine, then with an infusion of ground spices. The empty cavity was then packed with aromatic substances. Pure myrrh and cassia were favorites, though interestingly, they excluded frankincense. The body was then sutured closed with the same care a modern surgeon would use. Here comes the most crucial part. The corpse was entirely submerged in natron for exactly 70 days. Never more, never less. This wasn't arbitrary. 70 days was the precise time needed for complete desiccation without damaging the preserved tissues. After this lengthy preservation period, the body underwent a final cleansing and was wrapped from head to toe in linen strips. The inner side of these strips was coated with a special gum that served as an adhesive. Finally, the preserved body was returned to the family in a wooden case hewn into human likeness, essentially the world's first custom-made coffin. But what about those internal organs? The Egyptians believed they'd be needed in the afterlife, so they were separately preserved in canopic jars and placed within the tomb. Nothing was wasted. Everything had a purpose in the eternal journey ahead. Let's dive deeper into what actually happened in those mysterious embalming workshops, because this is where science met spirituality in the most extraordinary way. Modern archaeology has given us incredible insights into these facilities, and they were far more sophisticated than you might imagine. These workshops were strategically positioned at the desert's edge, literally between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. This wasn't just practical, it was deeply symbolic. Accessed by boat, these locations were far enough from human settlements to maintain sanitary conditions while being close enough to serve the community's needs. When archaeologist Howard Carter discovered Tutankhamun's tomb, he realized that even before unwrapping the famous pharaoh, he could predict exactly what procedures had been performed. The process was so standardized, so refined through millennia of practice, that it had become a precise science. Picture young King Tutankhamun's body arriving at what was likely his own bespoke embalming facility, possibly within his memorial temple grounds. In Egypt's scorching climate, where decomposition could begin within hours, speed was absolutely critical. The king's body would have been stripped and laid on an inclined embalming table. These tables were angled to allow fluids to drain away efficiently. The first step was always a thorough cleansing with natron solution. Now here's something fascinating about Egyptian beliefs. While the brain was considered redundant and was quickly removed by liquefying it through the nasal passage, the heart was viewed as absolutely vital. They believed the heart was the center of reasoning and would serve as testimony before the god Osiris in the afterlife. If embalmers accidentally removed the heart during the evisceration process, they would carefully sew it back into the body, though not always in the same location. This wasn't just about preserving flesh. It was about maintaining the spiritual integrity necessary for rebirth in the afterlife. Every cut, every preservation technique, every ritual gesture was designed to honor the spiritual journey ahead. The entire process took those famous 70 days. But it wasn't just waiting around. Those workshops were bustling with activity, multiple bodies in different stages of preparation, apprentices learning the trade, master embalmers overseeing quality control. It was an industry that employed hundreds of skilled craftspeople and supported entire communities. Now, prepare yourself for one of history's most bizarre chapters: the transformation of sacred mummies into European medicine. This story is so strange that if I told it as fiction, you'd say it was too outlandish to be believable. Around 1100 CE, something unprecedented happened in Europe. Mummies became medicine. By the 1500s and 1600s, this practice had reached its peak, continuing sporadically until almost 1800. We're talking about 7 centuries of Europeans consuming mummified human remains as medical treatment. Constantine the African described mumia as a substance found in tombs that was most desirable when it was black, shiny, and had, I kid you not, a foul odor. A 1700s herbal text characterized mummy as having a bitter taste and aromatic scent. Imagine walking into an apothecary and asking for that particular prescription. After the 1400s, Egyptian mummies became so highly sought after that an entire black market emerged. Authentic mummies were looted from graves and sold in their entirety across Europe. When Egyptian supplies ran low, enterprising merchants would substitute the bodies of travelers who had perished in desert sandstorms. Apparently, desert dried was considered the next best thing to professionally mummified. But here's where it gets truly wild. When even these sources couldn't meet European demand, counterfeit mummy makers emerged. One account from Egypt describes filling the bodies of slaves or recently deceased individuals with bitumen, that's petroleum pitch, wrapping them in cloth and drying them in the sun until they turned black. It was the ultimate fake product. The famous Swiss physician Paracelsus was a major proponent of mummy medicine. His followers recorded detailed recipes for preparing therapeutic mummies, which involved taking the body of a young man who had died violently, slicing the flesh, treating it with myrrh and aloe powder, and soaking it in wine. The 1651 book Art of Distillation includes a recipe for elixir of mummy that reads like something from a witch's cookbook. Here's the most ironic part of this entire story. The whole practice might have started from a translation error. The term mumia originally referred to bitumen, a sticky black natural petroleum pitch that had genuine medicinal properties documented by ancient physicians like Pliny and Galen. Due to bitumen's scarcity in nature, people began extracting it from mummified bodies, gradually confusing the petroleum product with actual mummified flesh. Mummy medicine was prescribed for everything from palsy and vertigo to internal bleeding and gout, though it was primarily used for external injuries. People with epilepsy, then believed to be caused by evil spirits, were given mummy along with various other human and animal-based medicines. The wealthy would consume it mixed with herbs, grains, fruits, spices, honey, wine, milk, butter, and oil. Can you imagine the dinner conversations? How was your day, dear? Oh, quite well. I picked up some fresh mummy powder from the apothecary for my gout. Let me tell you about one of archaeology's most haunting mysteries. A story that reads like the plot of a horror novel, but is absolutely, chillingly real. In 1872, some fortunate peasants made an extraordinary discovery in the cliffs near Thebes. They'd stumbled upon a concealed cache containing mummified remains of Egypt's greatest kings and queens, bodies that had been secretly relocated from their vandalized tombs by 21st dynasty rulers desperate to protect them from grave robbers. For years, these peasants, who came from a long line of tomb raiders, kept their discovery secret while carefully selling individual items from their find. Eventually, the sharp investigative work of the Department of Antiquities, led by Gaston Maspero, caught up with them. When the cache was officially opened and the royal mummies transferred to the Cairo Museum, most of the bodies were immediately identifiable through inscriptions and royal regalia. But there was one exception, one mummy that initially didn't attract Maspero's attention. This particular mummy was placed in a plain white coffin with no name, no inscriptions, no indication of identity. It was wrapped in a sheepskin of white wool, which was highly unusual. But as the museum's environment caused the mummy to deteriorate due to changes in temperature and humidity, Maspero decided to unwrap it immediately. At first, everything seemed normal. It appeared to be a typical 18th dynasty mummy. But as the unwrapping continued, the archaeologists were confronted with something that shocked them to their core. This was the body of a young man, about 5 feet 10 inches tall, preserved solely by dry natron skillfully applied to the body's surface. Unlike every other mummy in the cache, this body had not been eviscerated. The internal organs were still intact. But it was the face that truly disturbed everyone present. The expression was one of absolute agony. The mouth was open as if screaming, the features contorted in what appeared to be unbearable pain. Everyone present was deeply affected by the sight, and they all assumed the cause of death was convulsant poison. Maspero even speculated that the wrapping process might have begun while the man was still alive, an idea that has since inspired countless horror writers and filmmakers. Now, upon reflection, experts believe Maspero and his examining physician might have been overly imaginative. Many mummies have distorted faces due to late or careless handling by embalmers, and determining actual cause of death from mummified remains is extremely challenging. But modern mummy expert Bob Breyer has examined the unknown man, and several factors make this case genuinely mysterious. The sheepskin wasn't even large enough to cover the entire body, yet it was used anyway. The plain, unmarked coffin stands in stark contrast to the elaborate sarcophagi of the other royal mummies. Most tellingly, the fact that the body wasn't disemboweled, standard practice for all other mummies in the cache, suggests something highly unusual about this individual's death and burial. The man must have been of high rank to be included among the royal mummies, yet the casual, almost disrespectful treatment of his body suggests he may have committed some serious crime. Some scholars, including Breyer, have theorized he might have been a son of Ramses III, who plotted against his older brother for the throne, was caught and punished. But his true identity remains one of archaeology's most tantalizing unsolved mysteries, a puzzle that even the most skilled detective would struggle to piece together. Our journey now takes us from the banks of the Nile to the arid highlands of Peru, where an entirely different civilization developed their own fascinating relationship with mummification and death. The Nazca civilization thrived in southern Peru from 1 to 750 AD in one of the driest regions on Earth. Water was scarce, fertile land was limited, and life was exceptionally harsh. But ironically, this same brutal environment helped preserve one of their most mysterious legacies, about 150 mummified human heads that still retain intact skin, hair, and facial features after more than 1,000 years. Unlike the Egyptians' elaborate full-body preservation, the Nazca focused intensively on severed heads, developing a sophisticated ritual process that suggests deep spiritual significance. These weren't random acts of violence. They were carefully orchestrated ceremonies with profound religious meaning. The preparation process was incredibly methodical. After decapitation, the back of the skull was broken open to extract the brain, eyes, tongue, and throat. The hollow skull was then meticulously cleaned and filled with cotton to maintain facial structure. Most significantly, the lips were sewn shut using cactus spines, likely a symbolic method of trapping the spirit or soul within the preserved head. Every single Nazca head features a small hole drilled into the forehead with a rope threaded through and secured with a wooden toggle. Nazca artwork frequently depicts figures carrying severed heads by these cords, suggesting they were displayed during ceremonies, transported as sacred objects, or even worn as ritual garments. For decades, archaeologists assumed these were trophy heads taken from defeated enemies. But a groundbreaking 2009 study changed everything. By examining tooth enamel from both the severed heads and full mummified bodies, researchers discovered identical chemical markers indicating shared diets and local origins. These heads weren't from outsiders. They came from within the Nazca community itself. This revelation completely transformed our understanding of Nazca culture. These may have been ritual sacrifices, perhaps chosen individuals offered to secure water, fertility, or divine favor in their harsh desert environment. Or they could have been revered ancestors preserved for ongoing religious practices. The Nazca also practiced full-body mummification, especially among elites. Bodies were placed in seated fetal positions and wrapped in layers of exquisitely woven textiles, often accompanied by burial goods and offerings. These mummy bundles were placed in cave tombs or buried in the desert, naturally preserved by the arid climate, but enhanced through deliberate preservation techniques. Their artistic legacy supports this complex death culture. Nazca pottery frequently portrays detailed scenes of decapitation and human remains processing, including dramatic depictions of figures holding freshly severed heads with obsidian blades. A 2004 discovery of a corpse bearing precise cut marks around the neck confirmed that these weren't merely symbolic representations. They were documentation of actual practiced rituals. Peru continues to yield archaeological mysteries. In Andahuaylilas, elongated skulls with enlarged eye sockets fuel speculation about ancient practices we still don't understand. The famous Nazca lines, vast geoglyphs etched into the desert floor, visible only from above, continue to puzzle researchers worldwide. But among all these mysteries, the Nazca's approach to mummification and ritual preservation offers us a profound glimpse into a civilization where death wasn't an ending, but a sacred transformation preserved through the desert's unyielding dryness. Let's return to Europe for our final segment, because the story of how mummies became valuable trade commodities is absolutely fascinating and reveals just how dramatically these sacred objects were transformed by commerce. By the 1580s, both Egyptian mummies and naturally preserved sand mummies from Syria were known as balsamum and had become famous trading items throughout France. They were as closely associated with their regions of origin as sugar was with the Canary Islands. Imagine that level of brand recognition for human remains. In Ben Jonson's 1601 satirical work Poetaster, a merchant character named Albius declares his business philosophy, stating that all goods must be equally appreciated, whether exotic spices, frankincense, or precious balsamum. He even addresses his wife as, "My dear mummia, my balsamum," using mummy as a term of endearment. The casual way Johnson references mummy suggests it required no explanation for his audience. It was simply a known commodity. George Abbot, the former Archbishop of Canterbury, wrote about mummies in 1605, describing them as substances brought by merchants and used by apothecaries. Interestingly, he hadn't mentioned mummy in his 1599 first edition, suggesting he became aware of this new commodity sometime between 1599 and 1605. By the time he wrote about it, mummy appears to have been both prevalent and noticeable throughout England. His description, the color being very black and the flesh clung unto the bones, suggests he had personally observed these preserved remains, not just heard about them secondhand. By 1650, during Cromwell's time, mummy had become such a standard import that it appeared on official lists of goods subject to import duty, taxed at 1 shilling per pound. This wasn't a luxury item for the wealthy. It was a regulated commercial product with standardized taxation. The association between mummy and trade seemed to strengthen after the Restoration. When Samuel Pepys encountered a mummy, it wasn't in a collector's cabinet or a physician's office. It was in a merchant's warehouse, treated like any other inventory. By 1793, a government select committee discussing potential trade with Japan included mummy as one of 8 possible export commodities for an 800-ton ship carrying 7,000 pounds worth of European merchandise. Think about that. Nearly 2 centuries after first appearing in English markets, mummy was still considered valuable enough for international trade negotiations. Philippe Andreas Nemnick's 1799 trade dictionary listed the term mumia in 10 different languages: German, Dutch, Danish, Swedish, French, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, Russian, and Polish. The Spanish and Portuguese version, carnamomia, has a notably fleshy connotation that leaves no doubt about what was being traded. This wasn't just about medicinal bitumen or mineral pitch. This was definitely human mummy being bought, sold, shipped, taxed, and consumed across Europe for over 7 centuries. As we close our journey through the world of mummification, one question remains. Why has humanity always fought to defy death? From Egypt's golden sarcophagi to Peru's ritual decapitations and Europe's strange medical practices, every culture sought a way to linger beyond life. What drove them, and what can we learn from it today? The full story of these ancient practices is stranger, darker, and more fascinating than you can imagine. Download the Skoob app now to get access to the complete tale, uncover hidden secrets, and explore humanity's timeless quest to make mortality meaningful.